Steph. Today I'm going to present some of the highlights from work that we're doing together with the coordinators of the resource center networks in 5 countries on reflecting on the contribution of these resource center networks to learning and change in their sectors. So I'll give a brief description of the program that we're doing it under, the PSO program, what we've been learning about what sector learning means, how we've tried to track sector learning in the 5 countries, some indications of progress, some of the challenges we've been facing, and implications for IRC and moving forward on this topic. The PSO supported program is a program that, it's actually several programs. PSO is a network of Dutch NGOs, and they have supported IRC in doing several projects both on capacity building of resource centers and their coordinators, and on documenting how these resource centers contribute to change in the sectors. We've also supported IRC in the youth zone program and various things that we are doing internally around learning for sector change. There have been 2 phases in this particular program. The first one was mainly focused on capacity building and several things that we did together with the coordinators, so capacity building of the coordinators and the secretariats of the resource center networks, and some activities for the members. And the second phase is really more of a focus on joint reflection with network members, documentation of change stories, and still also some production of information products and services. The 5 countries that have been engaged are Burkina Faso, Ghana, Honduras, Nepal, and Uganda, where we've already had ongoing work and relationships with the resource centers, and from about 2002 onwards. And so this is just one step in their progression and in their development. The method that we've been using to document and reflect on change is called reflexive monitoring and action. This is a methodology that was developed by Wageningen University, more generally for exploring change in networks and system change, but we've applied it in our own context to try to get a better understanding of what sector learning means and what is happening in the countries. So in broad terms, we've used this method to clarify the steps and assumptions with the resource center coordinators. We worked on a vision for the sector and the contribution of the resource centers to that vision. Theory of change of what are different outcomes that could lead to that vision, and then what activities do the resource centers specifically need to undertake to try to contribute to those outcomes. We've been collecting stories of change, and there have been several activities around reflection across the countries. We've had several workshops. There have been Skype chats on the learning questions that the coordinators have identified. We have a wiki workspace, and there's also been a number of international events where coordinators were involved, like Stockholm Water Week. So just to take a step back, well, why are we focusing on sector learning? It's part of IRC's ambition to support learning in the sectors that we work in. We believe that a dynamic, mature sector needs ongoing learning to support stakeholders to meet challenges and to adapt to change. Now, one of the first documents that IRC produced that explained what our idea and concepts of sector learning are is the Sector Learning Leaflet, which is in 2008. We also had a workshop where a number of resource centers representatives were invited. And so that was also the starting point of our reflection with these coordinators in the PSO program. So sector learning being about spreading innovations, supporting reform in the sector, and increasing the ability of the sector to respond to challenges. Oops. In sector learning, we believe, and that's what we're trying to research also, contributes to better performance of the sector, better service delivery, by providing evidence-based lessons that can be used, by doing work on jointly developing new knowledge or validating approaches that have been used elsewhere, on facilitating the use of knowledge through capacity building, for example, or joint action research, organizing time and space for reflection in platforms that are organized, developing the capacities to upscale innovations and to adapt to changing circumstances. So we've come to a working definition of sector learning, which is the ability of sector stakeholders to jointly systematize the capture and sharing of experiences in the sector, and to develop joint capacity to reflect on these lessons in order to adapt and improve service delivery. Now that's quite a mouthful, but the main elements I'd like to highlight are that learning should help the sector be adaptive and responsive, and be able to make change happen, change towards more sustainable service delivery, change to adapting circumstances. It's about joint learning by both government and non-government and private sector stakeholders and community representatives at different levels. And we have also held it to be about a change in understanding and behavior beyond individual levels. So it should change. It should be about changes in interactions between actors, either organizational or institutional change. So visually that would look something like this. You have the red person who's learning and trying to make change happen, has to do that together with other people, but maybe that's within a specific organizational setting, and then we're looking at beyond an organization or beyond a specific network to having an impact in the whole sector. We've used a really simple framework to help us reflect on what changes do we see and where can we position them in, if we're thinking about a kind of a continuum from individual knowledge to actual change at sector level. And so I mentioned that we were collecting change stories, and what we've also done is try to put these in the different quadrants of this simple table to see where is the change, where are we, where is the change actually happening. And we've called this the learning effect framework, which we developed last year in the workshop. So I wanted to give an example of the theory of change that has been developed. This one is from Uganda, so it was developed by the Resource Center Uganda, and at the top you see the vision, which is a vision for the sector, a dynamic, coordinated learning WASH sector that provides equitable and sustainable WASH services. And then 4 of the key outcomes are highlighted here. Policymakers, planners, service providers, donors, communities are aware of and perform their responsibilities. A vibrant sharing, reflection, and coordination platform exists. Sector policies allow for continuous improvement in the WASH service provision, and human and financial resources to run the sector exist. So I've highlighted for one of the outcomes what some of the planned activities were that the network, or that actually mainly the Resource Center and in collaboration with a number of other organizations that's undertaken. So, for example, mapping existing learning initiatives to see what is actually happening in the sector, doing a study on how to institutionalize learning in the sector, and documenting learning processes that mainly that the network host, which is NetWAS, is facilitating. And then for the other outcome, the awareness of responsibilities and performance of these responsibilities. One of the unexpected things that has happened is that through the series of meetings that NetWAS has been, or the RC has been holding with different sector stakeholders, there's been a roundtable meeting on learning. And there's an increased interest in the sector about what learning means and how to do it, and how learning relates to already existing review platforms. So now there's discussions ongoing about who has the mandate for learning in the sector to lead it, and actually there are links with the SSS project, which is carrying out a study on how to mainstream learning in the sector. On the right-hand side, you see a drawing of the initial theory of change of the Ghana Resource Center network. The vision is a knowledge-driven sector that provides improved and sustainable WASH services, and a number of outcomes. One of them has been better budget tracking, where they've made actually quite interesting progress, but I'll tell you more about that later. When we look at the different theories of change for these 5 networks, sector harmonization and coordination have been on the agenda from the beginning, and also a focus on how that learning needs to also contribute to better service delivery. A common issue is also improving documentation and sharing good practices, because there's a recognition that there are a lot of good things happening. There is learning maybe at local level or at the level of a project or organization, but a resource center can especially play a key role in documenting and sharing, facilitating the sharing of good practices. When we look at the 5 countries that we're working with now, there are a number of differences, but also these theories of change are developing. But initially in 2011 we saw that there was a difference in focus on strengthening the network itself, or actually trying to make differences in the sector as a whole. And at the level of intervention, most of the resource centers have focused on national level activities. But for example, Nepal has worked to establish decentralized resource centers at regional level. And in Uganda, a lot of the learning and sharing activities have been at district level. So there is a difference at where you intervene, and also what the opportunities are for getting sector learning on the agenda. We can say that there's been a gradual move towards sector learning, evidenced by specific initiatives, and also support or stories of sector stakeholders who are really saying, learning is important. We see that resources are put into learning platforms, and actually capacity building has resulted, for example, in better documentation by network members, and an interest to get the resource center to document key sector events. So those are indications of progress. As I said, there's lots of interest in often knowledge management, but also learning, and trying to understand what does that mean, how what does a learning activity look like. So lots of practical information being requested. The resource centers that we work with still are mainly focusing on documentation and sharing experiences, and improving, for example, within projects. At institutional or sector level, we don't have so much evidence yet of changed policies or changed guidelines, although there are a couple of examples, and of course that also depends on your involvement with government and actual embedding of these lessons. So I wanted to highlight the stories of change that we've collected now have been, I believe we have 2 more that are not on this list, have been collected through talking to the resource center coordinators, the IRC colleagues who work closely with them, and in some cases we've been able to supplement it with some monitoring data, or quotes from sector stakeholders. So maybe just to highlight 2 or 3 of them. I mentioned already that in Nepal, decentralized WASH resource centers are being developed, and actually at national level this is supported by the master plan, which now mandates decentralized coordinating committees, and there's an interest of linking that with resource centers. So the resource center network has a good niche for itself, and there's real receptive. There's a receptive environment for WASH resource centers. In Honduras, we can see that change has started in thematic groups and actually has led to sector change. For example, the thematic groups have provided information on MUS and studies which have influenced policy level, and also developed information on transparency, which is now used in the training packages of the technicians. In Ghana, the budget tracking exercise that was initially done within the national level learning platform has led to a lot of discussion, has impacted on budget tracking, and has increased the transparency about spending. In Burkina Faso, there was a knowledge management study done of the sector, and that there was a lot of buy-in to the results of the study, which led to some new projects and initiatives by IRC and the Resource Center. And since the capacity building, documentation training, there's been a lot more writing and use of a blog that was set up. So there's more information exchange. So those are just a few of them. And we've written them up still in quite a short form, but we hope to publish them as a kind of a initial indication of the kinds of changes that resource centers can contribute to. It's not all a rosy picture, of course, because I think mainly the key challenge is doing all of the work that you set out to do, and we are working in most cases with one coordinator, and that person may have some support, but they really need to get support from the resource center and other network members. So that would be a challenge I hadn't mentioned here. But in terms of this particular reflecting changes, support to resource center networks from IRC has been different in different countries. We haven't been able to support each one equally. There's been staff turnover both on the side of the coordinators and on the side of IRC. It's been difficult to make time for reflection beyond one-on-one talks with coordinators. So doing the Skype chats with all of the coordinators, for example, has been difficult. Within the countries, there's also been challenges about the mandate of the resource center network. So who should be driving learning activities in the sector, and basically you need to have a good amount of activities in country that the resource center network can contribute to in order to really get learning and knowledge management or information exchange on the agenda. So one issue as we look ahead is the sustainability of learning initiatives. As I said, we do have, there is quite a bit of interest being expressed, but that doesn't always mean that there's finances being allocated by sector stakeholders. So it's become apparent that we need to really demonstrate the added value of learning, especially for government, and make it quite tangible how you could organize something. We have some examples on, for example, in Uganda, where you have existing platforms, how you can add on a more reflective knowledge sharing element to those kind of sector meetings. It would be useful for IRC to do more research into the effectiveness of working through resource centers if we want to catalyze change in the sector. There are other mechanisms that could also support learning and change, and we need to also look into them. And I mentioned also that perhaps if we're trying to document change, we need to make use of other monitoring tools like Flow, which we're using in Uganda and Ghana already to complement the stories of change that we're collecting. And there's lots of work to do on how to institutionalize learning beyond projects. And beyond this specific project, there's work for IRC to do. But at this moment, it's unclear how that will happen. So an issue of resources. There's a couple of places where you find more information about resource center networks, sector learning, resource center development. And yeah, maybe now we can go to questions and a bit of a reflection on these challenges that I've highlighted. Well, any feedback, questions?
Question?
Yes.
I was wondering what the collaboration has been between resource center networks and learning alliances, since they both seem to have a similar wish to strengthen sector learning.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the collaboration has been quite close. In Ghana, for example, the Resource Center hosts the National Level Learning Alliance platform meetings at the NLAP, and has also, I'm not sure, Marika would know better, the links with the other learning alliances which are in projects are linked to the NLAP, right, the specific working groups of that.
Yeah, the NALAP, the National Level Learning Alliance platform meetings, the monthly one, it's organized by RCN. It's been set up by RCN, and at the moment that's now the major sector. Besides that, there are a number of working groups. Some of them are also called learning alliances for specific projects. And the idea is that kind of the more hardcore technical discussions take part in those working groups and are then brought to the general sector on a regular basis. Maybe once or twice a year, the working group kind of shares on the national platform. Yeah. So RCN, the RCN Secretariat, all the different projects, different organizations are members of RCN, and the RCN Secretariat organizes the NALAP meetings. It sets the agenda based on the demands from the sector and from the different organizations, different members of RCN. Is that clear?
Maybe if I may come in on that. If I understand also your presentation well, Carmen, does it then mean that the learning alliances are like the kind of the platforms through which learning takes place, and the resource centers are the ones who facilitate it, provide secretarial support, help documenting meetings and events? Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is then I think a big difference from, let's say, how we approach resource centers a couple of years ago, where we actually saw the resource centers as the ones also providing the information, and I think they have now gone into more of a facilitating, supporting role. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, and also they provide some kind of capacity building support sometimes. I'm not sure if Michael Yonga is still with us, but maybe you could tell a little bit about in Uganda, because you have the district level learning and national level learning alliances that also are platforms where the resource center plays an important role. Are you still there, Michael?
Sure. I also asked him throughout Skype if he has a mic, and he doesn't answer yet.
Well,
Can I
maybe
something?
if he can join afterwards. And
Yeah, also, yeah, and well, if Michael maybe can type, if he doesn't have a microphone. Otherwise, in the meanwhile, can I add something?
Yeah.
I think it's important to differentiate a bit between the. I think we often confuse well, in the case of Ghana, the RCN Secretariat, which indeed has an important role in facilitating, organizing that, and the RCN members. I do think it's the members that contribute a lot of the content, and it's the members who then form the Learning Alliance and things like that. But it's the RCN Secretariat that organizes, facilitates, things like that. So it's not that the RCN doesn't provide content. The members of the RCN provide content.
Yeah. I think that's a very useful remark, because one of the things that we've encountered is that there are some. It is difficult to identify the mandate for the whole network, and also how the network is different from the mandates of individual network members, and whether that fights or is actually complementary. What I know about Uganda is the important role the research center has played in establishing the learning alliances at decentralized levels, and also working together with key stakeholders at national level to have national learning events. But they're not so much they happen every year or every 2 years, so it's less of a a frequent, less of an ongoing process than in Ghana, where you have a monthly national level learning event.
Well, there's of course always a little bit of a fragile balance between the different centers and organizations, as it's partly also a competition for money, for resources.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, where still one of the main bottlenecks appears, that for me so far governments are not providing sufficient resources to really focus enough on learning. And I think what we see that in most countries it's either piecemeal or it's international funding. But which of the countries you're working in now is really providing adequate national funding to take these kind of things forward?
Well, I think for example, in Uganda, there are national level review platforms, in Nepal as well, and there is a willingness to contribute to some parts of the national level learning initiatives that are being put forward by the resource center networks, but it's not sufficient. In Ghana, Abu was mentioning that different network members do now actually contribute financially to the monthly Learning Alliance meetings, but the sort of the core funding is usually from international projects, and that has a beginning and an end, and there's no real ongoing support. So institutionalizing this kind of constant documentation, reflection, capacity building has to somehow link to the already existing platforms that are budgeted for by government.
Maybe if I can follow up to Jan Teun's remark, I think then the question is what do we need funding for? And if I hear you talking, Carmen, I think what you said, you need a kind of a core funding for the secretariat of the resource center network to provide, I think what Marika rightfully says is the supportive secretariat support. You need funding for the specific Learning Alliance meetings and events, which I think, I mean, you can argue whether that could or should not come from international donors, or maybe even on a bit of an ad hoc basis. I think that even depends a bit. And I think what you're then saying, you need it then for more the studies and the evidence collection that is behind all the meetings. Is that, to summarize then, what you need funding for, and or are there other bits that are then not funded? And maybe then, based on that, then you can identify, okay, what needs to be, let's say, core funded from the government also for ownership, and what can be funded on a slightly more project-based, ad hoc basis. Could you give some insight into that from your findings?
Well, maybe, I mean, an important function is the documentation and versioning of different information products, and that, I mean, that could fall under a secretariat, but it's often also work that's done in collaboration, maybe through a working group. You might develop guidelines for it might be a participatory process where you're testing certain communication materials and then producing them. So I guess around documentation and information management, having some kind of repository that is available for people to use would also require some form of funding. I don't know if it could be logically clumped under one of the other things that you mentioned, but it's a specific kind of activity that a resource center.
Yeah, you could say that's maybe then part of that core funding for the resource center. Although, yeah, you can also link it to specific topics or products. But I'm surprised that you say that now, because I see that repository, let's say, function or sector memory, as we call it in IRC, wasn't really coming forward in your presentation. Whereas I think it was a key focus in the RCD program a couple of years ago. Does that mean that that function has gone away, or it's still there, but there has just been less development in that function of resource centers?
I think it's changed a little bit. I mean, one of the interesting information products that I think of is something like a sector blue pages, where you have you just make sure that people know who's who in the sector and how they can reach them, and then having some kind of sector agenda. And then the whole library kind of a function, the information repository of sector memory. No, it hasn't come out in my presentation. I think the resource center secretariats are still playing an important function in making information available through their websites, and in some cases also through a physical resource center library. And that's quite appreciated, but especially what I think is appreciated is providing some kind of summary or introduction to those documents, and in a way that's done by inviting people to Learning Alliance platform meetings and then talking about the documents. But it's also, for example, the Resource Center Network Nepal regularly, through their newsletter, provides updates on important publications or activities in the sector. And they have a physical library, and they produce a kind of a CD-ROM with all of the important publications digitalized. So I think that still is an added value that a resource center can play, and maybe specifically an online library could be something that IRC and resource centers could collaborate on, really provide added value for the whole sector, not just the national sector. But
here, of course,
I
think we have seen a significant change over the years. In the early days of IRC, we got a significant amount of money to act as a kind of repository information center where you could find a lot of information on the water and sanitation sector. But with the current state of internet, a lot of this is available online, so you can search, and so it's becoming more important to help people to find the right things, because that may be still an issue, then and maybe consolidate some of the information and put some quality marks. Well, that is one of the things. You find a lot of information, but the value of it you cannot always judge. So I think at the international level and at the national level in many countries, the situation has changed considerably. And so the role of a resource center in that sense changes more into a resource network, because you have to tap different sources, you need different people with different type of expertise. But what I missed a little bit in the presentation is how do we link this now up to the education system in countries, because the direct line with resource centers is working with sector actors that are in fact involved in projects and activities. What I see much less is the link to the feedback loop into the education system, to make sure that innovation gets embedded in university programs, in lower level training programs, etc. As we're doing, for example, in Ethiopia, where we work more with vocational training centers. I think that would be one of the areas where really further development is required.
I think when we talked, and sorry, So as a point on this, I was just going to add that when we talked with the coordinators about, who's in and who's out of the network, that was also one of my slides where I mentioned that it was about joint learning with different stakeholders. As if we're only learning with NGOs or only with government, then we miss out a lot of the links. And I think you're rightly pointing to the link with universities. It's not so much the natural, it hasn't been so much the natural partner of resource centers, but there are some links, and I think in Ghana, for example, but also in Nepal, where when they do the thematic meetings on a specific topic, it often also either would be university students or university professors who are engaged. But specifically for capacity building to improve the sector, I think that's not really on the radar of the resource centers yet. So it could be an interesting thing to look at for the future.
But I also think it can contribute to financial sustainability of the research centers themselves, even.
How?
If you link it.
Money in education. You mean?
Yeah. No, of course, we've got one of our classic examples of Sinara, where there's 8 university teachers being paid by the university. And so they work part-time in Sinara and part-time, but they basically work all the time in sector improvement and embed that in the university structures and beyond, because they're also working with all the partners. I think that was the initial idea in Ghana when the guys were still, I think, connected to Kumasi University or something. But they have then separated because of some interesting points that were coming up. And so now they're now an independent center, and they have to be independently funded.
It's grown quite a bit beyond just Trend nowadays. I think that having Trend organize the resource center network proved was a bit of a challenge. I think there was a need for an independent secretariat hosted by Trend, but having it, Trend as the main resource center just didn't really work.
Oh, but the point is that each of the, let's say, actors now has to be funded. So all of the guys that are working in the center have to be funded from outside funding. There's no core funding for, as is the case for IRC, as is the case in a way for Sinara, but also I think NET was in the past had some of that. If you don't have a core fund as a center, then you have to be very competitive, or have to depend on an international project, or which creates a lot of limitation. What you really want is to move it on to the national level, that they understand the value of this kind of learning.
But I think as it is now in Ghana, at least, it's not a center, it's a network, and it's a secretariat of a network. It's not a separate organization doing trainings and all kinds of things in order to make money. It's a network of organizations which has a secretariat, and at the moment there is core funding for that secretariat via IRC. And we're looking into diversifying that core funding.
Søren had a point?
Yeah, I have a more general question. I don't know much about the ICN, so this was a good introduction on where you're coming from, what you're trying to do. My overall question is, since it is called RCN, so it's not only RC resource centers, but it's actually a network of resource centers. And my understanding or my assumption would be that you have resource centers in 5 countries and they're supposed to network.
It looks different in different countries, yeah.
Okay, now my feeling is that from what you presented that I don't know if that was the original thinking. I mean, purely from looking at the countries, dealing with English, French, and Spanish-speaking countries on 3 different continents, that's quite a challenge. But my question is, one, has that been the original thinking to actually make those research centers network among each other in between Nepal, Honduras, and with 3 African countries in the middle, or not? And 2, has the experience shown that they have actually, their main focus was being a research center on their national level, and that's actually sufficient, and that's like the main idea and focus and thinking behind it. And
Yeah.
the whole network idea is actually not that.
The network, I think the network idea has more to do with the point that Jan-Teun was making, that you need to, if you only engage one specific resource center, you're lacking inputs from all, and knowledge and skills from others in the sector who you need. And so networking is about getting better buy-in and sustainability of what you're doing. The networks are not specific. They're not. The network members are not all resource centers. So it's not a network of resource centers per se.
Okay.
But in the different countries, the members are different. And also their level of formality is also different. So, for example, in Uganda, they're core group members that work sort of opportunistically together on specific things. And in Nepal, they've just recently formalized, so they're actually a registered network, which is quite a big difference, a range between them. And then the other issue you were asking about, the networking was never, we had a whole bunch of resource center partners way back when we had the Resource Center Development Program. Mm-hmm. And these 5 are the ones that we still work with, this PSO supported program was a way to help IRC do some joint activities, but actually their mandate is really to support learning and sharing and documentation in their country.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but yes, across
so it's more
all these different
partnership
languages,
than a network. No, it's.
But they have been able to learn quite a bit from each other because there are similar challenges being faced, and also when we look at the theories of change, that they are working towards the same kinds of changes in the sector that they want to see. So there are interesting things to learn. So we saw that we have one contribution from Michael Yonga from Uganda now, unfortunately unable to speak his own words out loud, but I'll read them out. That he wanted to add that the Resource Center Network in Uganda, in addition to helping plan and organize, provides support in terms of creating a learning agenda, supporting NGOs and individuals to write up cases, good practices that form the basis for discussion in the learning platforms. And you've also been developing formats to do that. So, thank you, Michael. Make some noise. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to bring up, or question?
I had one more question, Carmen.
Okay, one more from
question
Steph,
from my
and
side.
one more from Rika. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you were saying in your last slide that apart from the change stories, you could also use methods like flow. Yeah, I was just wondering, how has your experience been with these change stories? Is that a useful method in itself for analyzing, let's say, qualitative change? And secondly, well, I would have my doubts a bit about the use of flow specifically for measuring this, because with flow you can really measure impacts on the ground and not at all the intermediate steps. I think what you described, many stories first change a policy and then a decentralized level. So before that trickles down, let's say, to system level, community level, I think we are far down the line. So I wonder a bit about flow. But what, apart from flow, what other methods for monitoring the impact of learning have you been thinking about?
So those are two questions. The stories, I think at one level the stories are really useful because it's good to sit down and reflect and tell a story. And when you hear a story, it also the change comes to life. So it is a powerful and pretty simple method. And we've tried to keep the stories pretty short and simple. So actually, as a monitoring or as an evidence tool, you would probably need to get more references or get quotes from other stakeholders to really support it. But I think as a kind of a simple tool to catalyze reflection and sharing, it's working well. We thought of, or I was thinking of flow because it's already being used, and I thought it might be a source of other information about learning and change, and about impacts of the activities that research center networks are doing with stakeholders. But as you pointed out, if we're collecting stories at the, let's say at the user level, then it'll take time for the kinds of work that these resource centers are doing to translate into changes in service provision. But maybe using that kind of flow tool might be a useful monitoring method to use. We haven't really been thinking about other tools. I mean, basically what we've done so far is interviews with specific stakeholders, but there is an element of, you choose the people who you like and who like you, and you need to go beyond that. But to be honest, for monitoring learning, it's a really simple place to start is to monitor what people who go to your learning events register as new lessons, and their stories about what they've done differently. And I think that's something we could do more systematically. And in some cases, the RCNs are already doing that. They're evaluating the learning events quite well. So, yeah, that's just something to build on. Okay, and Marika also had one, and then I think we should round up to building.
No, not building. Yeah, mine was not building either. But maybe, well, building on steps. Maybe, I don't know whether you've looked into also whether the RCNs have been looking into the possibility of using SenseMaker in the countries where it is being used. Maybe that's something for the countries teams to take up.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of stories are being collected within RAS at national level and at service provision level. And I'm sure there could be some interesting things on sector learning as well.
Yeah.
But on another note, I was wondering, I think in 4 of the 5 countries where we had this PSO program, we also had a country program. So where I guess a lot of the content stuff happens in other projects, and then the RCNs are more coordinating and dealing more with the knowledge management, etc. In Nepal is the exception in that sense, I guess. We only had the PSO program supporting the resource center network there, but no other programs. Did you see a difference between that, or was there so much happening in the sector already in Nepal that you didn't really miss having a country program?
No, I think that would be an important thing to add for an outsider to understand the presentation. I think it's been quite difficult in Nepal, where we don't have other activities to dedicate enough time and support, which has been unfortunate, although there are lots of other activities that have helped the network progress. So that, I mean, in places like Ghana and Uganda, where we also have some big projects, where we can also ensure that the Resource Center network has a role, that is a really useful synergy. And in the case of Nepal, we didn't have that. And for example, in Honduras, there's been less of an active program now, but the network is quite active and had a lot of IRC support in earlier years. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of our meeting. We're going to have the presentation and the recording online. And thank you all for being here with us now.
Thanks.
Bye.